not further down the road as far as possibly make it to a Final Four.
Well, let's move on to what I call my upset of the week. Upset of the week. Upset alert. And that is Kansas 10 at Texas Tech. So the Red Raiders host the Jayhawks at home. Texas Tech comes away with, again, a win against the number 12 Jayhawks in the Pac-12.
Well, actually, I'd say it's a bigger surprise if Kansas were to win this game, considering how tough it is to win games away from home. Kansas certainly looks vulnerable. The fact that they are struggling to win the Big 12 and conference they've dominated for the last several years, I think is a concern from that standpoint. And these are the type of games you have to find a way to win if you want to be a legit contender. And for Bill Self's team, I think they desperately need to find a way to win this game to say that they are a legit threat when we get into next month.
Well, absolutely, and we are getting closer and closer to March Madness, and I tell you what, that's one of the best times of the year, one of the best 2 weeks of the year. Absolutely, Big Ten, another Big Ten matchup tonight. Wisconsin, number 22, Wisconsin against Northwestern Wildcats. What are your thoughts on that game?
Seeing what's happened to Northwestern after they made the NCAA tournament 2 years ago, unfortunately, Chris Collins has been unable to keep the momentum going. I think the renovation of Welsh Ryan Arena and them having to make the big commutes to Allstate Arena further down, about 20, 25 minutes away from campus, I think really hurt them in the long run. Granted, their stadium, Welsh Ryan's back up and going, but I think that threw a wrench into things, and they haven't been able to recover from it, and now they're back to where they were. Wisconsin certainly cannot afford to lose this game. Granted, I think they're solidly in the tournament, but as far as positioning-wise, this is a bad loss they cannot afford to have. They have to leave Evanston tonight with a victory.
Late game tonight, BYU against number 2 Gonzaga, 10 o'clock Eastern time. Certainly this seems like a botch Bulldogs, but what are your thoughts?
You look at, for BYU, I think a lot of people are saying watch. Gonzaga, I think right now, should be able to find a way to win. The question is, though, you look at the West Coast Conference teams that San Francisco, St. Mary's, can they have enough left in there to make a jump? And you talk about the bottom in the mid-majors non-power conference team. The last 7 years of the NCAA tournament, only 3 or less each of those years has gotten an at-large bid into the field of 68. This year, we could double that, if not just a little bit more, with teams like Buffalo standing out there, Wofford out there, Utah State, San Diego State, UC. Well, not technically UCF, but you look at Temple, you look at Belmont, Lipscomb, several teams. But the question is, though, will they get the nod over the power conference teams along that cut line, as opposed to what has happened the last few years when it seems like the power conference teams have gotten the benefit of the doubt against these mid-majors?
Let's, before we go on into some Indy Car talk while we still got you here, we're talking with Matthew Embury, WSBT, up in South Bend, which is closer to Michigan than it is Indiana in a lot of ways. So certainly you have some crossover coverage, and Michigan is certainly one of the teams that you cover quite thoroughly. And, of course, number 10, Michigan State tomorrow at home against the Wolverines. Big matchup, Big Ten matchup, big matchup for both teams. We look at Michigan, man, they were number 1. They were almost undefeated there for a while. Almost undefeated. That's like saying you're either pregnant or you're not. But Michigan, I don't know that they've fallen. I'm not really saying that is the end of the world. But I think that Michigan State has a better momentum coming into this game than Michigan does, even though they are at home. What are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, the loss to Iowa and the loss to Penn State and certainly is not. Yes, that red flag.
Can barely hear you, Matt. You're going to have to speak up, or something's going on here.
Conference tournament. So you look at that scenario. I I'd say right now this is a vulnerable game for Michigan, considering those two bad losses on their record. Now, granted, I think Iowa has enough to get into the tournament, but the loss to Penn State, a team that I certainly is not going to get in, is a red flag. And then also another road loss to Wisconsin is out there. And then, yes, granted, those are the three losses they've suffered all year, but I'd say those three losses, none of them look all that particular where you'd say that's an okay loss. Those are, at least two of those three, I'd say, are not so good-looking losses at this point.
Well, let's move into some racing talk. Matthew Embury is also our official IndyCar contributor. We hang out at the track here. We're getting closer and closer to the Indy 500. Love seeing this is May, Indy commercials on television. That tells me we're getting closer and closer. Obviously, still some time. But, hey, we're getting closer to starting of the IndyCar season. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit. We're going to get in more detail about this in the next hour with Steve Wilson from Speedway Digest. But what a great NASCAR Daytona 500. Long but good. And I remember I was texting with Steve. I said, and we still haven't seen the big one. Well, and then that's about when it happened, which was at the end of the race. And great win for Denny Hamlin, and certainly great win for Joe Gibbs Racing. And what I thought was really touching or historical or however you want to talk about it, and certainly we know that Joe Gibbs Jr. Lost his life to a cancer or disease that he had been fighting for a while, but certainly one of the executives in Joe Gibbs Racing lost him a month or so ago. They honored number 11 lap to Joe Gibbs Jr., and that was a very emotional moment for Joe Gibbs. But then for number 11, Denny Hamlin, to win the race, this was a huge emotional, impactful win for Joe Gibbs Racing. But overall, what are your thoughts about the and Denny Hamlin's win?
The crashes late, I'd say right now, are discouraging. The fact that if it's going to come down to a wreck fest, every restrictor plate race you get to, I don't think that sends the right message. Add to that also an opportunity loss for Kyle Busch. It's just like Mike Joyce said on the broadcast. He is becoming more and more like the Dale Earnhardt of this area. I mean, he's won so many races, but he can't win the Daytona 500. Now he's 0 for 13 in his career. Of course, remember, it took 20 tries for Earnhardt to finally win it. Could we dare be saying that for Kyle Busch in the next year or two down the road? Obviously a big win for Hamlin, but the question is, after going winless last year, is he ready to make a bounce back to being a contender for the championship? And I'd say that's still a far-fetched reality unless he can start proving that he is capable of winning at places more than just the restrictor plate tracks, where it seems like that is his ultimate advantage at this point. Short tracks, intermediates, and road courses, I think there is still a lot to be desired if you're looking for Denny Hamlin.
Well, let's get into some IndyCar talk. As I mentioned, Matthew's also our official IndyCar contributor. Not a lot of headline-breaking news, if you will, but we certainly want to talk a little bit about some of the stories that are happening in and around. So let's talk a little bit about McLaren trying to replicate the 2017 Indy 500 experience for Alonso. Alonso's coming back, as we know. Not as big as the news as it was in 2017, but he is coming back. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think right now the fact they're doing it on their own and under their own banner, I think, is going to be risky at best. The thing, though, that may save them is the thoughts of possibly as big as a 38-car entry list. I don't think that's going to happen right now. We're looking around 35 at best, just like it was last year. So that saving grace may save them in terms of qualifying, but if that's going to be a good performance on race day, considering they don't have a major partner like they did with Andretti Autosport a couple of years ago, I think it's going to be a learning curve potentially for them. I don't expect them to be a contender for victory. I mean, they'll make a few noises here along the way and down the road, but I don't know if they're trying to do it all under their same banner. If this is the year to expect them to make a major challenge for the victory.
What happens to the world? How much would the world shake and the world ends as we know it if Alonso comes and wins the Indianapolis 500?
Again, I'd say that's a long shot. I'd say it's a 99-1. If they had another partner in this that was competitive, like, say, Penske provided them some support or Ed Carpenter would provide them some support, I'd say they have a much better shot at this. The fact, though, that they're trying to do it on their own, I think, is a risky maneuver at best. And now, granted, I don't think they're not going to fail to qualify, but I think they would be much more competitive and in the right direction if they were able to, for instance, get into a better situation with Honda, if they had been able to do that so that they could have had some ties and continued the technical support with Andretti like they had a couple years ago. It's a big jump. I don't know the personnel they have running this program for a one-off, so you got to question. But, I mean, yes, the thing is, I mean, yeah, the driver has to play it a little bit, but at the same time, the car's got to be there in order, especially with as fast as they're going, in order to allow them to be competitive. And I'm not sure the car engine combination and the lack of technical support from other entities is going to be an advantage. I think it's going to be more of a handicap than a help for Alonso, as opposed to what he had, say, at the Rolex 24 when he had one of the better cars and a car that was capable of winning. I don't say that it's incapable of winning, but certainly they are going to be at a disadvantage in terms of technical situations, having to do this under their own banner instead of having a technical partner in there like they did 2 years ago. I think that's going to make it a much tougher test for them coming up this May.
How hard is it going to get for us to get used to seeing the NTT Indy Car Series?
I haven't done it yet.
That was like one of the first times I've done it, so there you go. Well, yeah, let's make this an official question. The NTT IndyCar Series moved forward with the new cockpit protection device, and it has named Advanced Frontal Protection, the AFP device. The 3-inch tall, I'm not going to get into all the math, titanium piece replaces the widescreen unit tested in the series at Phoenix International Raceway and, of course, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway last year. What are your thoughts?
Unless this is one of those things that's trying to keep the cars on the ground, I don't know how that's going to be much of a protection. I mean, David Land was mocking it on his site earlier this week, and I haven't gone to that extreme yet. But I just don't see – I mean, this just seems like a gimmick trying to keep the cars on the ground, and I don't know necessarily that's what they need. They need to find a way to prevent all the flying debris and the pieces from flying off the cars and possibly hitting a driver in the head, like what happened to Justin Wilson. And, of course, what happened to Ayrton Senna when he passed in 1994. So I don't know really if this piece really does anything to help the main concerns, which is flying debris. I think this is an attempt to try to keep the cars on the ground. But, granted, that is a concern. But I don't know if that's the major problem right now as far as driver safety in IndyCar. I think it's preventing and protecting drivers from the flying debris.
You know, man, also I'm curious to know if there's something more to the story about Pato O'Ward. If he has money for 5 races between Indy Lights prize money and some other sponsorships he found, why is Harding not running him in the first 5 races of the season? I'm confused about that.
Harding screwed up because they're the one that set the deal with the leases for an Indy-only ride with their second deal and the schedule with their second deal. That's not Honda's fault. That is Harding's fault, putting together the wrong kind of lease. Now, granted, they can change that down the road, but I think the situation with Chevrolet is one of those is a full-season lease, and then they only had the money together for a partial lease for the second car, and ultimately I think that knocked Pato O'Ward out. So while O'Ward was limited on funds on his end, I think Harding Steinbrenner, like I said last week, really made a poor decision by announcing 2 drivers for 2019 when the deals really weren't secure at that point to the point where you would make a confirmation like that.
Follow-up question on that. I'm wondering what the rules are around the Indy Light Scholarship Funds. You would think that they do have to be used in IndyCar, but maybe could Pato O'Ward take that cash to another series?
They have to be used for IndyCar. He's guaranteed at least 3 races with someone. The question is, like I said last week, though, is at this late a date, who is going to step up and help him? And, again, the options are limited. I mean, I think, unfortunately, either he's going to take an Indy-only ride with someone, one of the power teams, or if he tries for more races, I think the only option at this point is a team that needs money, and that is Juncos Racing. I mean, for now, they only have one confirmation. That's the Circuit of America round with Kyle Kaiser. If he's looking for